It was a gray November morning, the kind that carried the scent of rain even before the first drop fell. The city was slowly waking up, cars honking, bakery doors opening, and people hurrying to work, their collars turned up against the chill. Among the early risers was Emma, a young woman in her late 20s, clutching her travel mug of coffee as she hurried down the narrow street toward the cafe where she worked. She had worked there for almost 3 years, knew the regulars by name, and could tell who wanted their coffee black or with just a hint of sugar. As she passed the small park on the corner, her eyes caught sight of a man sitting on a worn bench. He was wrapped in layers of mismatched clothing, a thick brown coat that had seen better days, a knitted hat pulled low over his graying hair, and gloves with holes at the fingertips. His head was bowed, his hands cupped around a small paper cup, almost empty except for a few coins that clinked faintly when the wind brushed past. Emma had seen him before. He sat there most mornings, sometimes reading an old newspaper, sometimes simply staring into space. People called him Sam. No one seemed to know much about him, where he came from or how long he'd been there. Some offered him spare change, others hurried by, pretending not to notice. Emma slowed her pace as she passed him, torn between the comfort of her warm cafe and the image of Sam's thin frame shivering against the cold. She had always wanted to stop and talk to him but never quite found the courage. What would she say? Would he even want her to? At the cafe, she pushed the thought away and busied herself with the morning rush. The smell of roasted coffee beans filled the air, the espresso machine hissed, and her coworker Jake cracked jokes as he handed out muffins. Yet, even as she smiled at customers, part of her mind stayed with the man on the bench. When the rush slowed around 10, Emma found herself staring at the sandwich display. Ham and cheese, turkey and lettuce, egg salad. The warm glow of the cafe lights made the food look inviting, comforting. Without thinking much, she wrapped one of the turkey sandwiches in a napkin, poured a steaming cup of coffee, and slipped both into a small paper bag. "I'm stepping out for a minute," she told Jake. He raised an eyebrow. "Another good deed, Emma?" She grinned faintly. "Something like that." The park was quieter now. Sam was still there, hunched slightly, his eyes half closed as if he were trying to disappear into the folds of his coat. Emma hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Hi," she said softly, standing a few steps away. Sam looked up, his eyes a striking shade of blue despite the weariness that clouded them. "Hello," he replied, his voice low but steady. I brought you something." She held out the paper bag, her cheeks warming against the cold wind. He blinked, glancing from the bag to her face. "For me?" "Yes. It's just a sandwich and some coffee. I thought you might want it." For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached out and took the bag, his gloved hands trembling slightly. "That's very kind of you," he said. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Emma replied, smiling. "I work at the cafe down the street. I see you here most mornings." Sam nodded. "It's a good spot," he said quietly. "Not too noisy. I like watching people go by." He unwrapped the sandwich carefully, as if afraid to ruin it. "You didn't have to do this, you know." "I know," she said. "But I wanted to." He smiled then, a small, tired smile, but genuine. "It's been a long time since someone brought me a sandwich just because they wanted to." They talked for a few minutes. Emma learned that he used to work in construction until an injury and a series of bad luck had left him without a job, then without a home. "Things just unraveled," he said, looking down at his coffee. "One day you're fine, and the next, you don't know how you got here." Emma listened, feeling a lump rise in her throat. She didn't try to fix it or say something clever, she just listened. When she finally stood to leave, Sam said, "Thank you again. You've made my morning better." "Take care, Sam," she said softly. That night, as she closed the cafe, Emma couldn't shake the warmth that had settled in her chest. It wasn't just about giving him food. It was the connection, the simple act of noticing someone who had long been ignored. The next morning, she made another sandwich before work, this time from her own kitchen. She added a small apple and a note that said, "Have a good day." When she reached the park, Sam was in his usual spot. He smiled when he saw her. "Morning, Emma." She blinked. "You remembered my name." "Of course. People remember kindness." They talked again, and soon it became a quiet routine. Each day, Emma brought him a sandwich, sometimes with soup when the weather was cold. In return, Sam told her stories, about his childhood fishing trips with his father, about the old neighborhood he used to live in, about the stray cat that sometimes visited him at night. Other people began to notice. A woman from the flower shop started leaving a muffin for him now and then. A man who jogged past every morning brought him a thermos of tea. The once empty paper cup in front of Sam now often held more than just coins, it held small tokens of care from strangers who had begun to see him again. Weeks turned into months. Winter deepened, and Emma worried about Sam more each day. One morning, the park bench was empty. Panic surged through her as she scanned the area. After asking around, she learned that he had been taken to a local shelter during a particularly cold night. That evening, Emma visited the shelter. The room was warm and filled with the quiet hum of conversation. When Sam saw her, his face lit up. "You found me," he said, a little surprised. "Of course I did," she replied, handing him another sandwich wrapped in foil. "Couldn't let you miss your lunch, could I?" He laughed, a sound she hadn't heard before. "You're something else, Emma." From then on, she visited the shelter every few days. Sometimes they played cards, sometimes they just talked. Emma learned more about his life, the dreams he once had, the family he'd lost touch with, and his quiet hope of finding steady work again. Spring came, and with it, a chance. One of Emma's regular customers, a contractor named Mr. Harris, overheard her talking about Sam one afternoon. "You said he used to work construction?" he asked. "Yes, before his injury. He's been trying to get back on his feet." Mr. Harris rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I might have something for him. Nothing heavy, just site maintenance. Maybe it'll help him get started again." Emma could hardly contain her excitement. That evening, she rushed to tell Sam. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes wide. "After all this time," he murmured. "Do you really think he'd take me?" "I do," she said. "You deserve another chance." 2 weeks later, Sam started working at one of Harris's sites. The first few days were tough, but he never complained. Each evening, he'd stop by the cafe, his face a little brighter, his steps a little steadier. He had started saving his pay for a small apartment. "I don't know how to thank you," he told Emma one day. "You don't need to," she said. "You did the hard part." But he shook his head. "You believed in me when no one else did. That's not something you forget." Months later, on a warm summer afternoon, Emma was wiping down tables when someone tapped on the cafe window. She looked up and saw Sam, clean-shaven, wearing a neatly pressed shirt and a new jacket. In his hands, he held a brown paper bag. When she stepped outside, he grinned and handed it to her. "I made you something." Inside was a sandwich, turkey and lettuce, just like the one she had given him that first day. "You didn't have to do this," she said, echoing his own words. "I know," he replied, smiling. "But I wanted to." Emma laughed softly, blinking back tears. They sat on the bench outside the cafe, eating sandwiches and watching the world go by. For a while, neither spoke. The city moved around them, cars, laughter, footsteps, but in that small pocket of time, everything felt still. Kindness, Emma thought, had a strange way of coming full circle. What had begun as a simple gesture, a sandwich, a few kind words, had grown into something much bigger. It had changed not only Sam's life but hers too. Over the following year, Sam found a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. He reconnected with his younger sister, who thought he'd been lost for good. Every Sunday, he visited the cafe with a new story and a sandwich for Emma. Their friendship became a quiet reminder to everyone around them, that compassion didn't need grand gestures, only small, sincere ones. That noticing someone, really seeing them, could change everything. On the anniversary of the day they first met, Sam and Emma returned to the park bench where it all began. The trees were in full bloom, the air filled with birdsong and laughter from children playing nearby. Sam placed 2 sandwiches on the bench, one for her and one for him. "Funny how a sandwich can change a life," he said with a smile. Emma nodded, her eyes warm. "It's not the sandwich," she said. "It's the heart that gives it." They sat together under the soft light of afternoon, sharing food and quiet gratitude. Around them, the city pulsed with life, unaware that on one small park bench, 2 people were celebrating the power of simple kindness, the kind that begins with a sandwich and ends with a friendship that lasts a lifetime.